I never expected that something as simple as a video could turn my entire world upside down. It wasn't just a video, it was a revelation, a hidden truth that I wasn't prepared to face. When my uncle sent me the file, I wasn't sure what I was about to uncover, but I had no idea it would shatter everything I thought I knew about my family. The familiar Arizona sun was shining that afternoon, pouring through the blinds of my office, but there was a chill that seemed to settle into the room the moment I pressed play. There they were, my parents and my brother, Thomas, sitting around our old kitchen table. The table that had once been a symbol of family dinners, of laughter, of moments shared. But now it felt like a stage set for something darker. The video was shaky, clearly recorded without their knowledge, but their voices came through loud and clear. Every word they spoke felt like a slap across my face. "She only helps because she owes us," my mother said, her voice thick with disdain. I could almost feel the venom behind her words, each syllable dripping with contempt as she spoke of me as though I were a mere obligation, a burden to be borne. "After everything we've done for her, paying the mortgage is the least she can do," she continued, her words laced with a tone I'd never heard from her before, not in the years I'd spent helping them, not in all the sacrifices I had made for their comfort. Thomas chimed in next, his voice dripping with mockery. "Yeah, and she acts like she's doing us some huge favor. What a joke," he sneered, his smug expression visible even in the shaky video. But the worst part, the part that hit me harder than any of their cruel words, it was the sound of my father's quiet agreement. The man who had taught me how to ride a bike when I was young, the man who had sat with me for hours helping me with my math homework, now sat there with his arms crossed, nodding in approval as they tore me down. I never thought I'd hear him say it, but there he was, silent and complicit in the cruelty of it all. The video cut off abruptly, leaving me staring at the empty screen, my heart racing. I didn't know what to feel. Anger? Betrayal? Numbness? It was like someone had pulled the rug out from under me, and for a moment, I couldn't even bring myself to move. The room felt colder now, the bright Arizona sun doing little to chase away the icy feeling creeping into my chest. I watched the video 3 times, hoping that maybe, just maybe, I had misunderstood something, that there was some context I was missing, some explanation that could make their words less harsh, less final. But each time I replayed it, the reality hit me harder. There was no mistaking it. They didn't see me as family. They saw me as nothing more than a tool to use, a safety net they could rely on when times got tough. A good little girl who always stepped in to save them. And when they didn't need me, when I wasn't actively helping, I was just a nuisance, a reminder of the sacrifices they'd made for me. I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. For the past 4 years, I'd been making substantial payments on their mortgage through my LLC, Divine Investments. They had no idea. They thought they were making payments to a bank, a faceless institution. But in reality, I was the one writing the checks every month, the one covering the bulk of their payments while they made their small contributions, all the while complaining about the little I did. Every month, without fail, they'd send over their share, a mere fraction of the actual mortgage. And all I had ever asked for in return was a little appreciation, a little acknowledgement of the role I played in keeping them in that house. But instead, I had been reduced to a burden, a joke, someone who owed them everything, but was never truly seen for the person I was. I pulled up the spreadsheet on my computer, the one that detailed every payment I had made over the years. The numbers were precise, cold. Over $200,000. That's how much I had contributed, not counting the other payments I'd made to cover repairs and maintenance for the house, or the small purchases for their convenience that they never once acknowledged. They thought their monthly payment of $1,100 was the bulk of the mortgage. They had no idea that I had been covering the remaining $5,400 every single month, without fail. My uncle's message came right after the video. "You needed to see this, Emily." I couldn't stay quiet anymore. They've been talking like this for months. I should have been angry, should have been furious. But instead, a strange sense of clarity settled over me. I wasn't angry, not yet. But I was resolute. I couldn't ignore this anymore. I sat there in my office, staring at the screen in front of me, feeling the weight of the situation settle in. I had been their safety net for years, never asking for anything in return. But now I saw the truth. They didn't care about me. They cared about what I could do for them. And when that well ran dry, I was no more than a burden in their eyes. I didn't know what to do just yet, but I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't cover the next payment. Not this time. Not after everything I had learned. Let them face the consequences of their own actions. Let them deal with the bank. Let them realize that the woman they had dismissed as a failure, as someone who owed them everything, was actually their landlord. The thought brought a smile to my lips. It wasn't a smile of joy or of satisfaction. It was a smile of quiet determination, of someone who had finally had enough. Sometimes karma needed a little nudge. For as long as I could remember, I had always been the one to step in when things went wrong. Whether it was a school project that needed extra time or a family issue that needed solving, I was the one who quietly shouldered the burden, never asking for thanks or recognition. It was just what I did, what I had always done. And, for years, I had been convinced that this was my role in the family. They didn't ask for help. They didn't need to. I just provided it, knowing that it was the right thing to do. But what they didn't know was how much I had sacrificed to keep the illusion of stability going. They saw me as a resource, a tool they could rely on when things got tough. They didn't see me as their daughter. They didn't see me as Emily. At 27, I had already carved out a career for myself that many people my age would be proud of. I was a successful software development manager, working for a growing tech firm in Phoenix. I had worked hard for everything I had, building my career from the ground up, earning my place in a field that was still considered unconventional for women, especially those from my background. My mother made it abundantly clear that she didn't approve of my career choice. To her, software wasn't a real job. It was just something I was doing to kill time, a phase that I would eventually grow out of. "Your brother Thomas is the one with real business sense," she'd say, her voice dripping with condescension. "He's the one who'll keep this family's legacy alive. Not you." It stung. It always had. But I didn't let it bother me. Not really. I had bigger things to focus on. I had my work, my apartment, my life that I had built. I didn't need their approval. But in the back of my mind, there was always a nagging thought. A fear that if they ever needed me, I would be the one they'd turn to. And when the housing market crashed in Phoenix, that fear became a reality. I remember it like it was yesterday, the first time I saw the notice from the bank. The letter that said my parents' mortgage was in default, that the house they had lived in for decades was at risk of being foreclosed. Couldn't believe it. I mean, I knew things had been tight for them. My father's real estate business had been struggling for years, and Thomas, who had taken over the reins after Dad's health started to decline, wasn't exactly the financial genius everyone thought he was. In fact, he had nearly bankrupted the company within 2 years of taking over. But they had never said anything to me about it, never asked for help, and I thought maybe they didn't need it. I thought they were just going to pull themselves together as they always did. But when that letter arrived, the truth was clear. They were on the verge of losing everything. I wasn't sure how it all happened so fast. The market crash, my father's declining health, the collapse of Thomas's business. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't let them lose the house. I couldn't let everything they had worked for slip through their fingers. So I did what I had always done. I stepped in. Only this time it wasn't just a little help here and there. This time it was going to be a major commitment. A commitment that would change everything. I called my financial advisor, Kate, and told her what was happening. Kate was smart, calculating, and had a reputation for finding creative solutions to difficult problems. She had always been a few steps ahead of me when it came to money, which is exactly why I trusted her. We came up with a plan. I would create an LLC, buy the house through the company, and continue making the payments as though I were just another faceless lender. My parents would think they were paying the bank, not me. The bank wouldn't know about the arrangement, and I would be protected legally. It seemed like a perfect solution, one that would allow me to help my family without having to directly intervene. I wouldn't have to deal with their pride, and they wouldn't have to know that their daughter was keeping them afloat. It worked. For a while, at least. Divine Investments LLC became their mortgage holder, and I quietly made the monthly payments, supplementing their contributions. They never once suspected that I was the one keeping them in that house. They were content to go on with their lives, and I was content to let them. After all, I was helping them, right? I wasn't asking for anything in return. I was just doing what was right. But as the years went by, something started to shift. They began to take it for granted. They started complaining about how little I was helping, how barely they could make ends meet. I would listen, nod, and reassure them that things would get better, even though I knew they never would. I never told them how much I was really contributing, how I was the one covering most of the mortgage, all while they clung to their pride and their idea that they were self-sufficient. My mother would say things like, "She's so busy with her tech job. She barely helps out. What kind of daughter doesn't take care of her family?" I knew she didn't mean it the way it sounded, but it still stung. It made me question why I was doing all of this, why I was sacrificing so much for people who couldn't even acknowledge the depth of my contribution. And then there was Thomas. Oh, Thomas. He was always the one who was praised for his business sense. But after taking over my father's real estate business, he had nearly driven it into the ground. My father had trusted him to keep the business afloat, to turn things around, but Thomas had failed spectacularly. Still, no one ever mentioned it. They didn't dare criticize him. He was the golden child, the one who was going to save the family. And I was just the girl who worked in tech, who didn't understand real business. I tried to push it all out of my mind. I told myself that I was helping because I loved them, not because I wanted their approval. I told myself that I didn't need to be recognized for my sacrifices, that it was enough just to know I was doing the right thing. But as time went on, those quiet moments when I was alone in my apartment, looking at the spreadsheets and thinking about all the money I had invested into keeping them in their home, those moments started to feel heavier. And with every payment I made, every sacrifice I made, I felt more and more like a pawn in a game I wasn't playing. Before I share what happened next, the moment that left an entire room of journalists in stunned silence, I want to connect with you, my amazing viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever had to fight for something you believe in, hit that like button, because this story is just getting started. The day I received the video from my uncle was the day everything changed. I had always considered myself an empathetic person, someone who could sense the moods of those around me, someone who could read between the lines. But nothing in my experience had prepared me for the cold, brutal truth that came crashing into my world when I hit play. It was as if the universe had decided that I had been too naive for too long, and now I would face the harsh reality of what had been happening right under my nose. When my uncle's message popped up on my phone, I didn't think much of it at first. It wasn't unusual for him to send updates or random bits of news, but this time it felt different. The subject line read, "You need to see this, Emily. They've been talking like this for months." My fingers trembled slightly as I tapped on the video, the familiar thrill of curiosity coursing through me. I had no idea what I was about to witness, but what followed would shift the foundation of everything I had built my life on. The video started with a shaky frame, the camera clearly held by someone who was trying their best to be discreet. My heart skipped a beat when I saw them. My parents and my brother, all gathered around the same kitchen table where we had shared countless meals growing up. At that moment, everything seemed frozen in time, as though I had been transported into a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. They were talking about me in a way that made my stomach twist and my heart drop into my feet. "She only helps because she owes us." My mother's voice echoed through the speakers, sharp and venomous. She didn't even try to hide the disgust in her tone. It was as if I were a necessary evil, someone to be tolerated, not loved. The words hit me like a physical blow, each syllable gnawing at my insides, but it wasn't over. She continued, her voice getting more bitter with every word. "After everything we've done for her, paying the mortgage is the least she can do." Couldn't breathe. How could she say that? How could my mother, the woman who raised me, the woman I had trusted with every fiber of my being, speak of me like this? I had worked tirelessly for years, silently paying their mortgage, keeping their home intact, and this was the thanks I received? And then, as if her words weren't enough, Thomas spoke up. His smug face appeared on the screen, a look of superiority that I had grown all too familiar with. Yeah, and she acts like she's doing us some huge favor. What a joke. His voice was laced with mockery, as if the effort I put into helping them was nothing more than a joke to him. The worst part, though, the part that I will never forget, the part that is etched into my memory forever, was the silence that followed. My father, the man I had always looked up to, the one who had once been my hero, sat there with his arms crossed, not a word of protest, not a flicker of emotion on his face. He simply nodded in agreement with everything they said, as though my mother and brother had every right to belittle me. It was the silence that crushed me. He didn't speak out. He didn't defend me. He didn't even look uncomfortable. He just sat there, allowing my mother and brother to tear me apart while he did nothing. The man who had taught me to ride a bike, the man who had helped me with every math homework assignment, the man I had looked up to my whole life. Now he was nothing more than an observer, complicit in their cruelty. The video cut out abruptly, leaving me staring at a frozen image of my family, still seated around that kitchen table. My breath caught in my throat. The tears threatened to spill, but I fought them back. I couldn't let them see me break. Not now. Not after everything I had learned. I watched it again, and again, and each time, it hit me harder, each viewing making it clearer that my family had never seen me as an equal. I was a tool, a convenience, a means to an end. They had no idea that the house they thought was still owned by the bank was actually mine. That every penny they thought they were paying toward the mortgage was really just a small fraction of the total amount. I had covered the rest, every single month without fail, and yet they thought of me as a burden, a joke, a child who owed them everything for their sacrifices. I sat in my office, staring at the screen, my hands trembling as I scrolled through the video again, listening to their words over and over. It wasn't just the money that hurt. It was the complete lack of gratitude. The way they had reduced me to nothing more than a financial obligation, a person who existed solely to take care of their problems without ever asking for anything in return. I had been their safety net, their invisible protector, for years. I had kept them afloat during the roughest times, without ever expecting a thank you, a hug, or even a single word of appreciation. And now I saw it all for what it really was. They didn't love me. They didn't respect me. They saw me as someone they could use, someone who had no choice but to help them because, after all, I owed them. It felt like the rug had been pulled out from under me. I had spent so many years convincing myself that this was just what family did, that helping them was the right thing, the only thing to do. But now I was seeing the truth for what it was. I had been used. And worse, they had never even cared enough to see the person I had become. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of everything crashing down on me. For the past 4 years, I had been making payments through Divine Investments, my LLC. My financial advisor, Kate, had helped set everything up so that I could keep my parents from knowing the truth. They thought they were paying the bank, but it was me all along. Over $200,000. That was the amount I had quietly contributed to keep them in that house. And they had no idea. They never knew how much I had sacrificed for them, how much I had given up to make sure they didn't lose everything. And yet, here they were, complaining about how little I was doing, as if I owed them more, as if they weren't the ones who had asked for my help, as if I wasn't the one who had been there when everything was falling apart. My Uncle Jason's message came in as I sat there, still reeling from the video. "You needed to see this, Emily." I couldn't stay quiet anymore. They've been talking like this for months. I couldn't hold back the bitterness rising in my throat. Months. I had been silently supporting them for years, and they had been talking behind my back like I was nothing more than a bank account to them. I felt my fingers tighten around my phone as I read the message again. It wasn't just the money anymore. It was everything. The years of disrespect, the dismissive comments, the way they had always minimized my efforts, my career, my worth. I wasn't just their daughter. I was their provider, their unpaid servant, their good little girl who never asked for anything. And now I was done. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let them get away with it anymore. The truth hit me like a freight train, But it was in the quiet aftermath of that revelation that the real weight of what I had to do began to settle in. I had been their invisible benefactor for so long. But now, after watching that video and hearing the venomous words my family had been speaking behind my back, something inside me snapped. I had always prided myself on being the calm one, the one who could keep my emotions in check, the one who quietly took care of everything. But now, I was done being the one who did all the giving while they did all the taking. I sat there in my office, the dim light of my computer screen flickering against the darkened room, the hum of the air conditioning the only sound in the otherwise silent house. The world outside continued on, oblivious to the storm that was brewing inside me. But I knew I couldn't let this go. Not after everything I had done for them. Not after everything they had taken from me without so much as a thank you. They had no idea who they were dealing with. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I pulled up the LLC's financial records, each line of data glaring back at me with the stark reminder of how much I had sacrificed. Over $200,000. That was the total amount I had quietly paid to keep them in that house. Every month, I had sent off the extra money without a second thought, all while they complained about how little I was doing. I had been their safety net, their hidden benefactor, but the time for being their fall guy was over. The next mortgage payment was due in 2 weeks, and as I looked at the numbers on the screen, a plan began to take shape in my mind. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about power. It was about taking back control of a situation that I had allowed to spiral out of control for too long. And it was about sending a message that they would never forget. I picked up my phone and called Kate, my financial advisor. She had been my partner in all of this from the very beginning, helping me set up Divine Investments, making sure everything was legally sound, that I had the protection I needed to make this work. She was brilliant, and she knew just how to navigate the complicated world of finance. But today, I was calling her for something different, something more personal. Kate, I said, my voice steady, though inside, I was filled with a quiet excitement. I need to know my options with the purchase agreement for the house. I need to know if I can actually take ownership of it. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, and I could almost hear her mind working through the legalities. I had a feeling you might be calling about this, she said, not sounding surprised in the least. You remember that clause we put in, right? The purchase option clause. I nodded to myself, even though she couldn't see me. Of course, I remembered. It had been her idea to include the clause, just in case something like this ever happened. She had always believed that, at some point, I might need to protect myself if my family ever turned on me. It was a safety net, one that I hadn't fully understood at the time, but now it was my trump card. If they miss a payment, Kate continued, Divine Investments can exercise the purchase option immediately. The house would be yours outright and they would become tenants. If they're late with the rent, you would have the right to evict them. Standard Arizona eviction laws would apply. I felt a chill run through me at her words. This was it. This was the moment when everything would change. I had the power to take the house away from them, to make them face the consequences of their words and their actions. For the first time, I realized just how much power I held in this situation. And for the first time, I felt a sense of control, a sense of satisfaction that I hadn't felt in years. I'm sure, I said, my voice unwavering. But I won't do anything just yet. Let them think everything's normal for now. Let them keep pretending that I'm still the daughter they can manipulate. We talked for a few more minutes, going over the specifics of the agreement and what would happen if they missed a payment. It felt surreal, like I was playing some kind of game, and I was finally ahead. I hung up the phone and sat back in my chair, the plan settling into my mind like a perfectly fitting puzzle piece. The next step was simple. I needed to make sure I was ready. I needed to prepare myself for the moment when everything came crashing down. I had been their safety net for so long, and now it was time to turn the tables. They wouldn't know what hit them. I sat at my desk for a while, letting the plan marinate in my mind. I wasn't going to tell them anything yet. Not a word. I was going to let them continue their little charade, let them keep thinking they were in control. But when the time came, when the next mortgage payment was due, I would be ready. And they would face the consequences of their ingratitude. I didn't know exactly how it would go down, but I knew it wouldn't be pretty, and that thought sent a small, satisfying shiver down my spine. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. I double-checked all the paperwork for Divine Investments, making sure everything was in order. I spoke with Kate again, confirming all the details of the purchase agreement. I made sure that everything was airtight. I wasn't about to make a mistake now. Meanwhile, my family continued on, oblivious to the storm brewing just beneath the surface. My mother sent a text asking if I was coming to Sunday dinner. Of course, I said yes. I had to. I needed to maintain the facade, to let them think everything was normal while I prepared for the moment when it wouldn't be. The dinner itself was exactly what I expected. A carefully choreographed performance. My mother, ever the actress, was all smiles and sweetness, pretending as though everything was fine between us. Thomas, ever the arrogant businessman, greeted me with that condescending smirk that I had come to hate. My father, as usual, was silent, watching from the sidelines as my mother and brother played their parts. But I could see it now. I could see through their masks. They were pretending, and I was the one who had the power to expose them. I smiled, keeping my thoughts to myself. They didn't know yet, but they would. And when the time came, when I made my move, I would be ready. Dinner was always a production at my parents' house. A carefully choreographed event meant to mask the underlying tension that had been simmering for years. The table was always set just so. Polished silverware, the finest china, my mother's signature lasagna steaming in the center. There was an air of formality, like we were actors performing on stage, playing our roles as the perfect family. But this time, the performance felt different. This time, it wasn't just a dinner, it was a showdown. I arrived precisely at 6 p.m., the setting sun casting long shadows across the desert outside. The house was unchanged, a relic of my childhood, and yet it felt so distant now. The familiar scent of my mother's cooking wafted through the air, the same comforting aroma that had once signified safety, love, and belonging. But now it felt like a trap. The house that had once been a home was now a battlefield, and I was walking right into it, knowing that everything was about to change. I rang the doorbell and waited, hearing the familiar sound of footsteps approaching. My mother opened the door, her warm smile greeting me, but I could see the flicker of something in her eyes, a hint of calculation, maybe even a trace of guilt, though she tried to mask it. "Emily, sweetheart," she said, wrapping her arms around me in a tight embrace. "It's so good to see you." I hugged her back, but the gesture felt hollow now. I could feel the weight of the years of silence, the years of me giving and giving without ever receiving anything in return. I pulled away, offering a smile that was more for show than anything else. "Good to see you too, Mom," I replied, my voice steady. I could feel Thomas's eyes on me as I stepped inside, that smug, self-satisfied look on his face that always made my skin crawl. His arms were crossed over his chest, and his lips curled into a knowing grin. "Hey, sis." He greeted me with the same arrogant tone he always used. "Glad you could make it. I'm sure you've got plenty of work to do." "Huh? That tech job must keep you busy." I fought the urge to roll my eyes. "I always have time for family," I said, the words slipping out with more sarcasm than I intended, but I couldn't help it. The irony was too much. My brother, the one who had almost bankrupted the family business, was sitting there, passing judgment on me and my career, as if he had any right. My father appeared from his study, adjusting his glasses and holding a stack of papers in his hand. He gave me a distracted smile as he sat down at the table, never fully making eye contact. "Emily, good to see you," he muttered, almost absent-mindedly, as if I were just another person in the room, not his daughter. I could tell he was deep in thought, likely trying to figure out how to make the conversation go smoothly, how to keep up the facade of the perfect family, where everything was fine, where nothing had ever gone wrong. The dinner proceeded as expected, with the usual small talk and forced pleasantries. My mother asked about my job, pretending to care about the details, while Thomas chimed in with his own opinions about the tech industry, as though he understood anything about it. My father barely spoke, instead shuffling through papers and occasionally nodding, his mind clearly elsewhere. But all the while, I could feel the undercurrent of tension, the unspoken words hanging in the air, waiting for the right moment to burst. After a few minutes of meaningless chatter, my mother cleared her throat, setting the tone for what was to come. She reached across the table, placing her hand on mine, her touch so familiar yet so cold now. "Emily, sweetheart," she began, her voice dripping with sweetness that I knew was only a facade. "Your father and I have been talking, and we've been thinking about how blessed we are to have such a successful daughter. You know, we've sacrificed so much to give you a good education, and we've always tried to do what's best for you." I felt a wave of nausea rise in my stomach as she spoke, the rehearsed words like a dagger to my heart. They had sacrificed for me? Was that what they really thought? They had never once acknowledged the sacrifices I had made for them, never once mentioned the hundreds of thousands of dollars I had poured into their lives, into their home. It had always been about their sacrifices, their struggles, their needs. "The mortgage has become quite a burden on us," my father said quietly, looking up from his papers for the first time that evening. "We've been managing as best as we can, but it's been tough. I think we need to have a conversation about how you can help us more. Emily, you know, with everything we've done for you." I could feel the anger rising within me, but I kept my face impassive, my emotions carefully controlled. I had been expecting this. I had known this moment was coming, and I had prepared myself. But it didn't make it any easier to hear. They wanted more. They wanted me to do more, to give more, as if I hadn't already given them everything. "I understand," I said, my voice steady, though inside I was boiling. "I'm happy to help, of course." But even as the words left my mouth, I knew they weren't what they wanted to hear. They wanted more than just financial help. They wanted me to submit, to remain their little girl who always did what they asked, no questions asked. They wanted me to stay in that role, the one where they could take advantage of me without consequence. Thomas leaned forward, a smug look crossing his face as he added, "You know, you're doing so well in your job. You're the one who's got all the money. It would be nice if you could help out a little more. Maybe you could chip in for the mortgage like you used to, cover more of the expenses. It wouldn't hurt." My heart pounded in my chest, and I could feel my fingers tighten around my glass of water. How dare he? How dare they all sit there and ask me for more when they had no idea how much I had already done? No idea that I had been the one paying the bills, covering the mortgage, making sure they stayed comfortable in this house while they criticized me for not doing enough. My mother smiled sweetly, her fingers still resting on mine, but there was something cold in her gaze now. "We've given you everything, Emily. The least you could do is help us out a little. You're the one with the big tech job, after all. You don't have any kids, no husband to take care of. What else are you spending your money on?" I felt the air in the room thicken. The words hit me like a slap in the face, but I kept my composure, my poker face intact. They thought they could guilt-trip me into giving them more, into showing them how much I owed them for the sacrifices they had made. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't the same person I used to be. I wasn't the daughter they could manipulate and control anymore. "I've been helping you for years, Mom," I said, my voice cool but firm. "I've been paying the mortgage, covering your bills. I've been doing all of that without asking for anything in return. But I'm done. I'm done being your ATM. I'm done being the one who sacrifices everything while you sit back and take it for granted." The room fell into stunned silence. My father looked up at me, his face a mask of confusion and disbelief. My mother's hand froze on mine, her eyes wide, and Thomas's smug grin disappeared, replaced with a look of shock. They hadn't expected me to speak up, hadn't expected me to fight back. But I was done. "I'm not going to cover the mortgage anymore," I said, my voice unwavering. "You're going to have to figure it out on your own. I'm done being your safety net." I stood up from the table, my chair scraping against the floor as I pushed it back. "Good luck with everything," I said, my voice cold. "I'm sure you'll figure it out." I turned and walked out of the room, not looking back. I didn't need to. I had made my decision, and it was final. Let them face the consequences of their words. Let them feel the weight of their ingratitude. The next few days passed in a blur, each one carrying with it the weight of my decision. It was like a storm had ripped through my life, leaving behind a trail of destruction, but also a strange sense of calm. I had stood up for myself. I had made my choice, and there was no going back. But even as I held onto that resolve, the reality of what I had done began to sink in. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't about the house or the mortgage. It was about something much deeper, something that I had ignored for far too long. I couldn't stop replaying that dinner in my mind. The shocked silence that had filled the room when I told them I was done. The way their faces had dropped. The disbelief that lingered in the air like an unspoken accusation. My father's confusion, my mother's panic, Thomas's stunned silence. None of them had seen it coming. And why would they? For years, I had been the one who always came through. I had always been the one who silently picked up the pieces when everything fell apart. But now, they were the ones facing the consequences of their actions, and I wasn't about to save them this time. The next morning, I sat at my desk, staring at the computer screen in front of me. The numbers were glaring back at me, the hard truth of everything I had done for them, everything they had never acknowledged. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I pulled up the financial records again. Each line of data a reminder of the sacrifices I had made. Over $200,000. That was how much I had paid to keep them in that house, to make sure they never had to face the reality of their own failures. And they had no idea. They had no idea that their daughter, the one they had dismissed so many times, had been their silent benefactor all along. I opened the purchase agreement for Divine Investments, scrolling through the terms that I had carefully set up years ago with Kate's guidance. The purchase option clause. It was there, in black and white, a legal safety net that I had never fully understood at the time. But now it was the key to everything. The next mortgage payment was due in just a few days. And for the first time, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I took a deep breath and made the call. I dialed Kate's number, my hands steady as I listened to the phone ring. She answered on the third ring, her voice calm and professional as always. "Kate," I said, my voice firm but steady. "I need to exercise the purchase option on the house. It's time." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I could practically hear her processing the information. She had always been a step ahead of me, and I knew she would understand exactly what I meant. "Are you sure, Emily?" she asked, her tone cautious but not judgmental. "Once you take ownership, there's no going back. It's a big step. Are you prepared for the consequences?" I paused, thinking about everything that had led up to this moment. The years of silent sacrifices, the constant disrespect, the betrayal I had finally confronted. I had spent so long trying to protect them, trying to maintain the illusion of a perfect family. But now I was ready to stop pretending. "I'm sure," I said, my voice steady. "They've had their chance. Now, it's time for them to face the truth." I could hear her nod on the other end of the line, even though she wasn't physically there. "Understood. I'll get the paperwork ready. We'll proceed with the purchase." As soon as I hung up the phone, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was a sense of relief, a weight lifting from my shoulders, but also an underlying sadness. This was it. This was the moment when everything changed. I had made my decision, and there was no going back. My family would never see me the same way again. But that was the price I had to pay. Over the next few days, I went through the motions, talking to Kate, finalizing the legalities, preparing myself for the inevitable fallout. But even as I handled the logistics, there was a quiet part of me that kept thinking about what would happen once they found out. How would they react when they realized that their daughter, the one they had dismissed as nothing more than an obligation, was now their landlord? How would they respond when they found out that I had been the one paying for everything all along? I couldn't predict their reaction, but I knew one thing for sure. It wasn't going to be pretty. They wouldn't understand. They would fight it, try to manipulate me into changing my mind. But I was done. This time, I wasn't backing down. The day the payment was due arrived, and I felt a strange sense of anticipation building inside me. I had already made the arrangements. The paperwork was in order. The house would officially be mine, and they would be nothing more than tenants in it. The thought should have felt like sweet revenge, but instead, it felt like the end of something. The end of a chapter in my life that I had once believed in, but now saw for what it truly was, a facade. I sent the final notification to my parents, informing them that the payment was overdue and that the terms of the agreement would be enforced. I knew it would be hard for them to grasp, hard for them to accept, but they needed to understand. They needed to see the consequences of their actions. As I sat at my desk, waiting for their response, I thought back to everything that had led me to this point. The endless years of silence, the unnoticed sacrifices, the constant dismissal of my efforts. I had always tried to be the good daughter, the one who did everything for everyone without complaint. But now I realized how much I had given up in the process. I had sacrificed my own happiness, my own peace of mind, just to keep the peace with them. And for what? So they could continue to take from me, to use me without ever once acknowledging what I had done. I heard the buzz of my phone, and I knew the moment had come. My mother's name appeared on the screen, and I hesitated for a moment before answering. I wasn't sure what she would say. I wasn't sure how she would react. But I knew I had to face it. "Emily," she said, her voice strained, her words clipped. "What is this? What are you doing? You can't just take the house away from us." Her words hit me, but I didn't flinch. I had heard it all before, the guilt, the manipulation, the emotional blackmail. I had spent years absorbing it all, never once questioning the price I was paying. But now I was done. "I'm not taking the house away from you, Mom," I said, my voice calm. "I'm just making sure that I'm no longer the one carrying the weight. You've had your chance. Now, it's time for you to deal with the consequences." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and I could almost hear her trying to process what I had just said. "You can't do this," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You're our daughter. You're supposed to help us." I closed my eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. "I've helped you more than you'll ever know. But I'm done now. It's time for you to figure it out on your own." And just like that, I felt the last piece of the puzzle fall into place. The resolution had been made, and I had taken control. There was no turning back. As I hung up the phone, a strange calm settled over me. It was as though I had finally exhaled after holding my breath for years. The anger, the resentment, the betrayal, it all started to fade into the background, replaced by something else. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was drowning in someone else's expectations. I had taken back control, and there was no going back. But despite the sense of resolution that filled me, I couldn't shake the unease that lingered just beneath the surface. My mother's voice still echoed in my mind, her words dripping with disbelief and hurt. "You're our daughter. You're supposed to help us." How could she still say that? How could she still make me feel responsible for their mistakes after everything I had done for them? I had been their financial safety net for years, quietly shouldering the weight of their failures, their poor decisions, and their refusal to acknowledge my efforts. I had been the good daughter, the obedient one, always ready to pick up the pieces when things went wrong. But I wasn't that person anymore. I wasn't the one who was going to fix everything, make it all better, and pretend like it was all okay. They had made their choices, and now they had to live with the consequences. The next few days felt like a blur. My phone buzzed constantly, texts from my mother, calls from Thomas, all of them begging, pleading, trying to get me to change my mind. But I didn't respond. Couldn't. I had made my decision, and there was no going back. I knew they were desperate, that they didn't know how to function without me being there to take care of everything. But that wasn't my problem anymore. I spent the next week quietly preparing for the fallout. I met with Kate to finalize the details, making sure everything was set in motion. The house was officially mine, and they were now tenants. The paperwork was all in order, and the bank would be notified of the change in ownership. It was a done deal, and the moment the next mortgage payment came due, the reality of it all would set in for them. But even as I prepared for the moment when everything would change, I found myself questioning what would happen next. Would they really accept this? Would they come to terms with the fact that I had taken control, that I had finally stopped being their financial lifeline? Or would they fight me, push back, try to manipulate me into backing down? I wasn't sure. But one thing I knew for certain was that they wouldn't be able to manipulate me anymore. Not after everything they had said, not after the way they had treated me. I had let them get away with it for far too long, and now it was time for them to face the truth. The day the payment was due arrived, and my phone rang again. It was my mother. I didn't pick up. I didn't need to hear her voice, pleading, begging me to help them again. I had already made my decision. There was nothing more to say. But then, an hour later, a message from my brother came through. "You're making a huge mistake, Emily. We're family. You're really going to let us lose everything over a couple $1,000s." His words stung, but they also confirmed everything I had feared. They still didn't get it. They still didn't understand why I had done what I did. To them, it was about the money. It was always about the money. But to me, it was about something far bigger. It was about my dignity, my boundaries, my right to say no. I didn't respond to him either. Couldn't. There was nothing left to say. The days dragged on, the tension building as I waited for them to react, for them to finally grasp what had happened. I knew they were talking behind my back, plotting ways to fix things, ways to make me change my mind. But I wasn't going to give in. Not this time. And then, one afternoon, a week after the payment was due, I received a text from my mother. I hesitated for a moment before opening it, knowing that whatever was inside would change everything. "I'm sorry," it read. "We were wrong. I was wrong. We never meant to hurt you, Emily. We didn't know how to ask for help without feeling ashamed. You've always been there for us, and we took that for granted. Please, we need your help. We can't lose the house." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I could feel my heart tighten in my chest as I read and reread her message. Was this it? Was this the apology I had been waiting for? Was this the moment when they finally understood? Or was it just another attempt to manipulate me, to get me to take care of them once again? I stared at the screen for a long time, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to forgive them, to let go of the anger and pain that had been building for years. But another part of me, an even stronger part, knew that this wasn't just about an apology. It was about change. It was about standing my ground, about not letting them walk all over me anymore. I sat there for a while, trying to find the right words, but there were no words that could undo what had been done. There were no words that could make me forget the years of sacrifice, the years of being taken for granted, the years of being their backup, their safety net. And so, I typed out a simple message in response. "I'm sorry, Mom, but I can't help you anymore. You need to figure this out on your own." The moment I sent the message, a wave of relief washed over me. I had made the right choice. I had taken control of my life, my future. I had stopped letting their needs dictate my happiness. It was over, but as I sat there, looking at my phone, I couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. Would they figure it out? Would they learn from this? Or would they continue down the same path, expecting me to rescue them again? The days that followed felt like a slow, inevitable unraveling. I didn't hear from my family immediately after I sent that message, but the silence spoke volumes. It was as if they didn't know how to process the fact that I had taken such a decisive stand. They were used to me being there when things got tough, always the one to soften the blow, to shield them from the consequences of their own actions. But now, there was nothing they could do to fix it. The ball was in my court, and I wasn't about to back down. The initial weight of my decision slowly began to lift as I realized just how much I had been holding on to. I had spent so many years thinking that I was doing the right thing by taking care of them, by covering for their mistakes, by shouldering the burden of their mistakes. But what I hadn't realized was that in doing so, I had allowed myself to disappear. I had erased my own needs, my own desires, my own boundaries in the name of being the good daughter, the obedient one. I had sacrificed everything, my happiness, my peace, my future, all for them. And for what? So they could continue to treat me like their personal bank? As time passed, the weight of their silence began to sink in, and for the first time I felt free. There was no more constant anxiety over whether I was doing enough, whether they were angry with me for not doing more. I didn't have to live up to their impossible expectations anymore. I didn't have to be the one who always made everything better, the one who always sacrificed while they sat back and took everything for granted. But still, there was a part of me that wasn't entirely at peace. I couldn't just let go of the years of hurt and betrayal so easily. I couldn't ignore the way they had spoken about me, how they had treated me like a tool, an object to use and discard at their convenience. It was impossible to erase the sting of those words, of the way they had dismissed my efforts, my sacrifices, as though they meant nothing. A week after I sent my final message, I received a call from my Uncle Jason. I hadn't heard from him much since everything had unfolded, but I knew he had been keeping an eye on the situation. He was the only one who had seen the truth before I did, the only one who had warned me about how my family had been taking advantage of me. When I saw his name on my phone screen, I hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hey, Emily," he said, his voice calm but concerned. "I just wanted to check in. How are you holding up?" I could hear the genuine concern in his voice, and for a moment, I felt the knot in my stomach loosen. "I'm okay," I said, trying to sound confident. "It's been tough, but I'm starting to feel like I made the right choice. It's just hard, you know?" "I know," he said softly. "It's never easy when you have to make a stand like that, especially with family. But you're doing what's best for you. You've been carrying them for so long, and it's time for them to figure things out on their own." His words felt like a balm to my wounded spirit. Jason had always been the one person in my family who understood me, who had always seen me for who I was, not just as someone to help, but as a person who deserved respect and care. His reassurance was the reminder I needed that I wasn't crazy for standing up for myself. I had done the right thing no matter how difficult it was. I don't know what's going to happen next," I admitted. "I don't know if they'll ever understand. I don't know if they'll ever change." Jason was quiet for a moment before he spoke again, his voice steady and grounded. "You can't control how they react, Emily, but you can control how you let them treat you. You've set your boundaries, and that's the most important thing. You don't owe them an explanation. You don't owe them anything anymore." I let out a slow breath, the tension in my chest easing as his words settled over me like a warm blanket. It wasn't easy, but I had done what I needed to do. I had let go of the false sense of obligation that had bound me to them for so long. I had finally learned to put myself first, to prioritize my own well-being. The next few weeks were filled with awkward moments and strained conversations. My family tried to reach out, each of them in their own way, but I knew they were still reeling from the shock of my decision. My mother sent messages, some apologetic, others more demanding, asking for my help again, asking for me to come to their rescue. But each time I stood firm. I didn't respond, couldn't. And then came the day when they finally faced the consequences of their actions. The day the bank sent the official notice that the house was in jeopardy. They called me, panicked, their voices filled with fear and desperation. My mother's voice trembled as she explained how they had fallen behind on payments, how they had no way to catch up. My father's voice was low and resigned, like he had known this day was coming but didn't know how to prevent it. "Emily, we need your help," my mother said, her tone raw. "Please, we can't lose the house. We don't know what to do." For a brief moment, I felt the familiar pang of guilt. I wanted to help. I wanted to save them. But I knew that helping them again would only reinforce the unhealthy cycle we had been stuck in. I had given them everything for years, and they had never once appreciated it. They had never once seen me as anything more than a tool to use. And I wasn't going to let that happen again. "I'm sorry, Mom," I said, my voice steady but firm. "I can't help you this time. You need to figure this out on your own." There was silence on the other end of the line, and I knew that she was processing my words, trying to come to terms with the fact that I wasn't going to save them. I wasn't going to be the one who always picked up the pieces anymore. Finally, my mother spoke, her voice quieter now, almost defeated. "I understand," she whispered. I just don't know what to do." I could hear the tears in her voice, but this time, I didn't let it sway me. I had made my decision, and I wasn't going to let my emotions dictate my actions anymore. "I'm sorry, Mom, but this is something you have to figure out on your own." And with that, I ended the call. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. But as I sat there, looking at my phone, I realized that I had finally taken control of my own life. I had set boundaries, I had stopped enabling them, and I had walked away from a situation that had drained me for years. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The days that followed my decision were quiet, but not peaceful. My phone continued to buzz with messages, but I had resolved not to respond. Each message from my mother felt like a tug at my heartstrings. Each word a reminder of the years I had spent sacrificing for them, silently hoping that one day they would see my value. But now I knew better. Now I understood that my value wasn't defined by how much I could give, by how much I could put myself last to make sure they were taken care of. My mother's text messages started to shift from desperate pleas to subtle attempts at manipulation. "You're the only one who can fix this, Emily. We don't know what we're going to do without you. We can't lose the house. Please don't let us lose everything we've worked for." Her words were filled with guilt, the same guilt I had been trained to absorb for years, but I couldn't let it sway me. Not anymore. They had taken me for granted for far too long, and this was my line in the sand. The next time I saw my family in person, I knew the tension would be thick in the air. I had been invited to a family gathering, one that was being held at my mother's house. I almost didn't go, but there was a small part of me that needed to face them, to see how they would react now that they knew they couldn't rely on me to solve all their problems. I arrived on a quiet Sunday afternoon, the house standing exactly as it had always stood, sturdy, familiar, but now somehow colder. The door opened before I had a chance to knock, and there was my mother, standing in the doorway with that practiced smile she always wore. But there was a difference now, an edge to her smile, a wariness that hadn't been there before. "Emily," she said, her voice trying to sound cheerful, but it was strained. "So glad you could make it. We've missed you." The words felt hollow coming from her lips, like she was trying to bridge a gap that I knew could never be closed again. I stepped inside without saying much, offering a small nod in return. "Hi, Mom." My eyes flicked to my father, who was sitting on the couch, his gaze flickering toward me but quickly averting. There was no warmth in his expression, no comfort, just silence, the kind of silence that spoke volumes. I could feel Thomas's presence before I even saw him, that suffocating arrogance that always surrounded him, even when he wasn't speaking. He stood in the kitchen, his arms crossed as he watched me enter, but didn't say anything. I could feel the tension building in the room, like everyone was waiting for me to say something, to break the silence. But I wasn't going to. I wasn't going to let them see how much this all hurt, how much it had torn me apart to make the decision I had made. "So, how's everything?" I finally said, breaking the silence, my voice controlled, almost cold. I wasn't sure why I asked. Perhaps to see if they were really aware of what was happening, or if they still thought they could go on pretending that nothing had changed. My mother shifted uneasily, glancing at my father before she spoke. "Things are complicated, Emily, but we're managing. We're doing the best we can." The words felt like a lie. I could see it in her eyes, in the way she refused to meet my gaze for too long. She was trying to protect herself, to protect her pride, but I wasn't going to let her anymore. I wasn't going to be the one who picked up the pieces for them. Not this time. "I've been thinking about what you said," she continued, her voice faltering slightly. "I know I've been hard on you, Emily. I've been selfish. I'm sorry for that. But you have to understand, we were only trying to protect you. We didn't want you to feel like you owed us anything." I felt a rush of bitterness flood through me. Protect me? By making me feel like a failure? By treating me like a financial safety net instead of a daughter? The words tasted sour in my mouth, but I swallowed them down, keeping my composure. "You never asked me if I wanted to be the one carrying the burden, Mom," I said, my voice low but firm. "You never asked if I was okay with constantly having to cover for your mistakes, to make sure you didn't face the consequences of your actions. And that's the problem. You never saw me as a person with my own needs. You saw me as a tool." Her face fell, the mask she had carefully built starting to crack. "I didn't mean for it to be like that. You thought I didn't have my own life? My own responsibilities?" I cut her off, my anger rising. I've spent so long trying to fix things for you, to save you, but I never once got the same from you. I've been your safety net for years, and in return, I've gotten nothing but criticism and guilt. It stops now. The room was silent again, but this time, it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was a realization. The truth was out there now, raw and unfiltered. My family knew what I had done, what I had been doing, and they knew that I wasn't going to keep doing it anymore. They could either learn to stand on their own, or they would face the consequences of their own actions. Thomas finally spoke, his voice laced with frustration. You don't get it, do you? We're family, Emily. You're just going to let us lose everything because of some stupid moral high ground. I turned to face him, my eyes narrowing. You think I'm doing this out of pride? You think this is some game where I'm trying to prove I'm better than you? I've been trying to help you, Thomas. But you've run Dad's business into the ground, and you've done nothing but complain about everything I've done for you. I'm done. He scoffed, throwing his hands up in frustration. You're really going to let us lose the house over your pride? Over some stupid decision that makes no sense. It's not about pride, I said, my voice steady, despite the tension that was coiling tighter with every word. It's about respect, and I've given you all the respect I have. But now, it's time for you to respect me. The room fell into an uncomfortable quiet again, each of us processing the words that had just been spoken. I didn't know what would come next. I didn't know if my family would ever understand what I had done, if they would ever respect my decision, but I knew one thing for certain. I had finally taken control of my life, and I wasn't going to let anyone, not even my family, take that from me again. A month had passed since I made that final decision. Everything had changed quickly, not just for my family, but for me too. After that dinner, I could no longer see my family the way I once had. The people I had spent my life loving and caring for were no longer those I could rely on, at least not in the traditional sense. I had drawn a line, not because I wanted to, but because I had to protect myself from the negativity and selfishness they had failed to see. When I refused to help them again, my mother had responded with silence, followed by a long period of guilt-laden messages and desperate phone calls. It was difficult, more difficult than I had imagined. The way she had raised me to believe that I was responsible for their well-being, that I had to be the one to save them from their mistakes. Those years of conditioning were not easily erased. But I knew deep down I had done the right thing. I could no longer be their emotional or financial crutch. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I focused on what felt right, building my own life, one where I was no longer defined by my family's expectations of me. I threw myself into my work, into friendships that were supportive and genuine, into passions that I had neglected for too long. And gradually, the sense of relief began to outweigh the guilt. But even as I began to rebuild my life, the reality of my family's situation loomed over me. They were struggling. There was no denying that. My mother had to sell some of their possessions, my father had grown increasingly withdrawn, and Thomas, despite his bravado, seemed to be drowning in the consequences of his failed attempts to run the family business. And then, one afternoon, the call came. It wasn't my mother who reached out this time. It was Thomas. "Emily, I need to talk to you," he said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "I've messed up. We've all messed up. I wasn't sure what to expect. Part of me wanted to hang up, to continue building the distance I had worked so hard for. But another part of me, the part that still carried a bit of hope for my family, wondered if this was finally the conversation where they would take responsibility for their actions. "Go ahead," I said, bracing myself. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I'm really sorry. For everything. For the way I treated you. For not understanding what you were doing all those years. I see now. I see how much you've given. And I never appreciated it. We never did." His words were genuine, and they hit me harder than I expected. I wasn't sure if I should feel relief or anger, but there was one thing I did know. This wasn't about me anymore. This was about him and the realization that he had been wrong. "I've been thinking a lot," Thomas continued, his voice steady. "We've been selfish, and I've been an idiot. We didn't get it, Emily. I get it now. We've all been drowning in our own pride. And we need to fix things. starting with you. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. It's not just about saying sorry, Thomas. It's about doing better. It's about showing that you understand what you've put me through. I know, he said, his voice heavy with sincerity. And I'll do better. I promise. That conversation marked a turning point for me. For the first time, I felt like my family was seeing me. Not just as the person who could fix everything, but as someone with their own needs, their own limits. They had finally recognized that. But more importantly, I had learned to set my own boundaries. I had learned that it wasn't my responsibility to shoulder their burdens anymore. In the weeks that followed, my family began to change. Slowly but surely, they started to take responsibility for their actions. My father started consulting financial advisors to work out a plan for their debts. My mother took a part-time job to contribute to the household. And Thomas, after years of self-delusion, took a hard look at the family business and began to turn things around. I still wasn't sure what the future would hold for us as a family. I didn't know if we could ever go back to being the close-knit group we once were. But I knew one thing for sure: I had found peace within myself. I had found the strength to stop living for them, to stop sacrificing myself for their mistakes. And that peace, that sense of self-worth, was something I would never let go of. As for the house, I didn't take it from them. I had exercised my rights, and legally it was mine. But when the time came, I made the decision to transfer it back to them, on the condition that they take full responsibility for the payments. It was my way of ensuring they didn't take me for granted again. I wasn't going to do everything for them, but I would give them a chance to rebuild, as long as they knew that the days of me rescuing them were over. In the end, my decision had been the right one, not just for my family but for me. It had been painful, yes, but sometimes, in order to truly help others, you have to let them stand on their own 2 feet. They had to learn to face the consequences of their actions. And I had to learn how to put myself first. Before I close this chapter, I want to thank you, my readers, for joining me on this journey. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to choose yourself over the people you love? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and share your experiences. And if you've ever had to set boundaries to protect your peace, hit that like button. Because sometimes the best way to heal is to walk away and let things fall into place.